Okay, welcome to the four functions of management, the final function, controlling presentation lecture. Please make sure that you have the notes along with this presentation lecture so you can fill those in as we go along and go through the material. Okay, slogan trivia. This slide we are not going to discuss here in this presentation lecture. This is something that we are going to do as an in-class activity next time that we meet. And basically kind of give you a little bit of a gist of exactly what's going to happen is you're going to take a slogan trivia quiz, and then after that we will get into groups or individuals. We might do it either way and be able to discuss how the competition motivated your team, as well as how did motivation differ in your team if the team was far behind or just barely ahead. How did your team motivate each other? How would a small business use these strategies to motivate their employees? So those are some of the things that we are going to look at as a class, as an in-class activity tomorrow. Or I'm sorry, maybe if not tomorrow, the next time that we meet. All right, so back to the four functions. We've already talked about planning, organizing, and leading. Finally, controlling. This is the function that's going to ensure that the goals in the planning section have been achieved. So how is that done? What are strategies used to do that? Well, first thing you need to do is you need to figure out, how do we know what is happening? So when it comes to controlling, how do we know if we're even on track to meet these goals? Well, the first thing that we want to do is compare our budget with actual costs. So a budget is a preview or a prediction of what it's going to spend and or how much we have in costs as well as money coming in revenues to determine what we're going to spend where. Now, after this has all played itself out, what are the actual costs and how does that compare to the budget that we created earlier? Use personal observations. As you go through the everyday, day in and day out activities, business processes, are we actually on track to reach our goals? If not, modifications need to be made. If so, keep doing as is, remain in the status quo. Use a quality control program. Quality control is something that is very important, especially in the business world. Quality control is used to determine whether or not customers are being handled appropriately. Also, it's also used to determine whether or not business processes are as efficient as they possibly could be. An example of this, especially in the manufacturing world, might be lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing is making sure that just enough materials are on hand to make the product be efficient, get it produced, and get it out to the customer without having a lot of lag time and without having a lot of overstocked material. Within quality control, setting the measures or standards built into a production process. So that's kind of like what we were just discussing before with the lean example, especially in the manufacturing world. Now, taking corrective action. So in the controlling phase, we realize, hey, God, we got something wrong here. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be addressed because it is not aligning with our goals that we set in the planning stage. So the first thing we might do is we might replace inputs. This might be reallocating of resources. So if it becomes reallocating of resources, now we have to rewind back up into the organizing phase to take this corrective action. So replacing inputs such as people, materials, etc. We might use preventative measures. This might be things that are going to be represented, say, in our risk management plan in an attempt to either monitor, moderate, and even manage different risk. We might revise our objectives and goals. We might go back to that planning stage and realize, you know what, the goals and objectives that we had set are not going to be achievable. They need to be adjusted. Or we've achieved them and now we need to move on, so we need to update them and make them a little bit more rigorous. All right, let's take a look at this problem. Let's just say, for example, you decide to take corrective action only when an expense goes over budget by 10%, which is a pretty small amount. The amount you budget for a long distance telephone call is $350. Last month, your long distance expenses were $395. Okay, so here's the problem. How are we going to address it? If we take a look at this, we have to answer a couple of questions. First of all, what is the difference between budgeted and actual amounts? Well, we can see here that we have an actual amount of $395 and we have a budgeted amount of $350. So if we do the math, $45 is the difference. So the question is, in the controlling phase, you as a manager, would you take corrective action? Why? or why not? This is something that every manager is going to address differently, depending upon personality, depending upon experience, depending upon knowledge. There is no right or wrong answer in this case, just based off of what's best for the organization and what's best based off of the information given at hand. So, would you take corrective action? Some of you might say yes, some of you might say no. But the question would then be, why would you or why wouldn't you? All right, concepts check. Let's go into your notes real quick and write the answer down to this, just to start thinking about some of the things that we've already discussed. Explain why it is important to take action when goals are not met, and give an example of an action that could be taken. Feel free to reference that example that we just talked about in the previous slide. Pause the presentation lecture and go ahead and answer that question. All right, applying the 4 functions of management. Let's start putting this all together. Planning. We know what planning is. Planning is the goals and objectives and putting them into a plan and giving us a roadmap as to where we want to go. Use a SWOT analysis. SWOT, S-W-O-T, stands for strengths. What do they do well? Well, think about that in terms of the planning phase and the 4 functions of management. Weaknesses. What do they not do so well? Most managers, it is a tough thing. It is easy to recognize strengths. It is difficult sometimes to recognize weaknesses. One of the phrases that got me hung up as I go through this thing, and I was learning about it, especially through my graduate program, was you need to know what you don't know. If you think about that for a second, it can be confusing, but once you put it all together, it does become quite clear. You need to know what you don't know in order to learn and make it something that you know. Opportunity. Opportunities is what new could the company do? So how can we change things? Are there other opportunities out there that we can take advantage of? Or maybe there's some that are out there that might not be in our best interest because the risk might be too high. So analyzing those opportunities. And then finally, what are the threats? What is working against them? So what is working against some of those opportunities or what is working against what we have in place here that could possibly hurt us in the long run? This is all part of the planning process. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, also known as SWOT analysis. When it comes to planning, writing a strategic plan, having a strategic goal in place, also a tactical goal, an operational goal based off of weaknesses, opportunity, or threats. Putting something in place that somebody can, or some of your employees and other subordinates can relate to, can work towards, can relate to what is going on within the business structure, processes, and even some of their individual tasks could be very beneficial. Moving on to the organizing. Remember, this is the resources and resource allocation. So what resources do we need to complete our operational goal? What might they be? Where will we get these resources? How are we going to find them? What's the best possible vendor to go through? Then the leading. What will you do to lead and motivate your employees to accomplish the goals? Remember, now that you have the plan in place, you have your resources, now you have to motivate your resources to be productive and accomplish those goals. What will you do to do that, make that happen, make that a reality? What management theory will encourage your managers to use and why? What is your management beliefs? What do you think is the best for motivating people? Put those in place, recruit and train lower level managers to do the same. And then finally, controlling, the last function of management. How will you know if you have met your goal or not? What benchmarks are you looking for? These are the things that are going to be put in place that you are going to assess and analyze to determine whether or not you have to go back to the previous 3 functions of management and make adjustments. What will you do if you don't meet these benchmarks? What's going to be your action plans, your contingency plans that might need to be put in place in case adjustments do need to be made? And that concludes the controlling end of the 4 functions of management, as well as tying everything together. Please make sure that you have followed along and completed the notes that go along with the presentation lectures, part 1, part 2, and part 3. If need be, revisit them to get the notes, and I will see you the next time we meet in class.